So, good morning. Welcome to the third episode of Art Voices, the series that we put together with Farrah, Carbonell, and Art at Vol that brings together artists, curators, art market leaders, and other professionals to speak about art and about contemporary art language and the art landscape and everything that's going on and that's important to the artists today. Hi, Farrah.
Hi, Elena. How are you? I'm excited to be here.
I'm very good and excited to be here as well. My name is Elena. I'm running art and community at hug.art, which is a .art domains platform. We run open calls and create various opportunities for the artists worldwide. It's a pleasure to be here today. One thing that I wanted to mention, or a couple of things that I wanted to mention before starting our conversation today, is an ongoing .art award, which is literally award.art. You can see the banner below our images here that you can apply to as an artist and create a really unique opportunity for yourself. An opportunity to win $15,000 in cash, be a resident in a few very significant European artist residences, get an art coverage with a major publication and so on. So without a very long explanation, I would just encourage you to go to award.art. It's free and very easy to apply, so go check it out. Also, Farrah and I, we just put together an open call where we select the artists to highlight over the end of 2026. So it's a very long open call, and there are also super unique opportunities there, including being acquired for a very special collection of Art and Gold and .art domains and hug. So we will post more about these opportunities on all of our social medias. Another little favor to ask is if you can follow us everywhere. We are posting a lot of updates on X, so please do that. So it's a very exciting conversation today. We will be putting Chidi and Grant now to stage. We are speaking about the changing art today. What is changing? Is art changing? Are we changing? I think it's a great topic, and I think these two gentlemen are amazing speakers to share about that. Maybe we should start with introductions, and I will just go ahead and let you guys introduce yourself. Let's start with Grant. Hi, Grant. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me today. So I guess very briefly, I'm Grant Yoon. I'm an American-based artist focused mostly on digital mediums, but translating it over to physical from time to time. Really exploring kind of Americana themes and more so realist and realism-based themes.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining. I've seen a lot of your work on different platforms, and I'm really excited to speak about your platform, about your practice and thinking behind all the art that you create. Chidi, hello. It's nice to have you here as well.
Hey, yeah, thank you very much. My name is Chidi Nwaubani. I'm a Nigerian-British artist, creative technologist, and designer. My work is really centered on history, but also how do we take ownership of history, retell stories, and really deeply into like my own history as as a Nigerian and as an African. How can we take back some of those stories and retell them with like a new sense of agency? So I really play with different mediums. I think that's something that we're gonna talk about today. That play between the digital and the physical mediums that we're both working in. So like really excited about this conversation.
Thank you. Sounds like a super exciting project that you're working on and your art. I'm super curious to learn more about it. maybe let's just start with our first question, and maybe it could open up to share more about your practice and what you guys are saying in the more general art world. So our question today, what is changing, or more relevant to you, how the art world and your practice as well has been changing over the years. How is it different today from when you started, and maybe what influenced this change? Please join the conversation.
Yeah, Chidi, I don't know if you wanted to start.
Yeah, I guess I can go in first. Like for me, Grant, I don't know about you, but my introduction into the art world was like very different from like many people. I didn't come through a traditional art background. I'm a designer by trade and originally. Still, I guess came from like a foundational art degree, but I really came in quite new, and my introduction to like the art world was through actually the NFT world. I created a project which I sought an intervention of how we can take back stolen items through like these digital forms, and then through that conversation, it then led me into like this deeper conversation of like why should we be given these items back, where should they go, and like really expanded. So for me, a lot of things have been like very like new to me in terms of like the like types of conversations I've been introduced to, and I've really joined into the art world at a time when that digital conversation was really kind of being like is being challenged, right? And for better or worse, we're now in a time right now where I think the spectacle of what like the kind of the first year or two of NFTs is kind of gone, and now we're having a lot of real conversations around digital art, around people using digital mediums, the reasons why people are using those digital mediums, and I think that's been like a pleasure to see. Even most recently at Art Basel Miami and in Switzerland, now you've seen with 010 and the things that are happening there. It's just like amazing to see those conversations now flourishing, and it's like really helped like an artist like myself.
Yeah, I think very similarly. I'm not traditionally trained at all. I'm just self-taught as an artist, and so my formal introduction into everything also came through NFTs, and so I think we've both been very fortunate to have this opportunity before us. I would say, when I started my practice, I didn't know very much, but, of course, there's been a lot of self-development throughout the years. But I think in terms of just like in regards to the contemporary art world and how I view my practice these days, I've been really focused on trying to be an advocate for digital illustrators and digitally native artists. I think, of course, digital native art mediums have been in contemporary art for ever since they have been a thing. So, from the 1970s and beyond. But really, I feel as though there has been a renaissance in terms of how people view the legitimacy of digital art. And the practice as a whole, not only as just the practice, but also as viewing these things called NFTs and tokenized ownership as a real thing. And I think that there is a lot to still be learned, and hopefully we can talk about this more later on in our conversation. But I think how I've been viewing my practice in recent years is how can I translate some of my digitally native aesthetics into a contemporary, kind of into a contemporary world with still being identified as an artist who primarily focuses on tokenizing his assets through the blockchain.
Very interesting. So it seems like both of you are not professionally trained artists, right, Chidi? Or you have some education in arts?
I'm professionally trained through life and
I mean, yeah, it's just it depends what you call I mean, we're all in a way professionally trained right now
Yeah.
by our jobs. Yeah. So my question, since we have a lot of, I know, emerging artists in our audience and artists who are just starting their careers, your projects are very different. But I'm just curious, what inspired you to start your digital art careers? How did it all start? And I guess where it brought you right now, but as an inspiration for our artists, if you could share some of your stories.
I guess I could answer that first. I know Chidi has a pretty, like a very, I would say powerful, at least when reviewing his, work and portfolio, he seems like very has a very powerful message and story behind his practice. And I think I as well have a pretty strong kind of motivation behind why I'm creating my art. But I'm glad we're both on this call today because I think we both approach different concepts and ideas. I'd say and I know a lot of people probably have heard this story because it's something that I've been asked before, but when I first created my practice, I was studying to go to medical school, and so I wanted to create artworks for patients in hospitals, which is why I really focused on kind of the American landscape because that's where I live and I practice, and so that's really what started everything. But along the way, I learned about a lot of the American focused. Kind of art movements, including like American folk art and American realism and things like that. And so, how that's transformed over the years is, I've really learned, I've really taken the time to learn about um, the what it means to be an American artist and what American art, contemporary art looks like. And I think that for the most part, I think that there's been a lot of evolution over the past 150 years. And I think some of that has unfortunately resulted in a lot of these kind of realism based themes to disappear into more abstract and more kind of conceptual practices. And so I think for me, at least, how I started was focused on realism. And I think moving forward, I've also still been really focused on trying to showcase to the world these themes that I think are very important that shouldn't be forgotten about.
Just a question for Grant before we move on. Was there any like one that like inspired you, or any like moment that like really inspired you when you like before you actually got into like your practice?
Yeah, the university I went to, which was the University of Wisconsin, had a museum called the Chazen Art Museum. It has a pretty, it has like a world-renowned collection, but it's free to the public, so you can go anytime. And I saw a lot of the pop art there for the first time in my life when I was attending university. So, I saw like Ed Ruscha's Standard Station and a couple other things, and then I also saw a lot of the because the University of Wisconsin is kind of embedded deep in America, kind of in the middle of America. There's a lot of kind of region specific artwork as well, and a lot of those artists like John Stewart Curry or Thomas Benton and Grant Wood really not only created art about the American landscape, they were also hired by the US government during the early
Oh wow.
1900s to try and kind of boost morale during war efforts. And so I think there's a lot of like propaganda, American propaganda, and things like that that I saw what they were trying to visually show about the places they lived and what it means to be an American and things like that. And I think that really spoke to me. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I
Mm.
really got inspired.
Yeah, I've like taken that like inspiration as well. There's always something that I think there's obviously a spark, and there's obviously gonna be like this one thing that's gonna like where you get maybe like your first idea. And I remember what that was like for me. But I think there was always throughout my life, there was always this urge to do something that was representative of like my culture in a way, or something around this story of somebody who's like a Nigerian but also British at the same time. So there's like this lost element of culture. So I'm also trying to like trace back to those things, and then that's where this idea of like the stolen artifacts came, like through those stolen artifacts, specifically the Benin Bronzes, which are originally from Nigeria, but um, are some of the last few artifacts that have not been given back, and we don't see any actual push from the British Museum to give those specific artifacts back, even though that they've been called again and again. And I feel that every generation there's someone that's calling for these artifacts to come back. So the idea came to me of, well, why don't we just take them back? Like, why don't we just go and take them? And then that's where this whole idea started to formulate of, well, what would it mean to take the Benin Bronzes back? How would we do that? Obviously, going there physically and doing like a heist, like we saw in the Louvre just just not too long ago, it's obviously illegal, but there's a way in which you can do this in a legal way. So I physically went to the British Museum and dressed like we were going to rob the place, but actually it was like a pseudo heist in a way, and used LiDAR scanners to take scans of the Benin Bronzes. And then once we had those scans, it was almost like a new canvas to start creating. And that's where the story began of like, okay, we've got this digital scan of a Benin bronze, got this digital scan of the stolen artwork. Now what do we do? And that's really been my like inspiration of like continuing on like the story. I call it cultural continuation because mostly inside of the archives and inside of the museum, a lot of the stories they kind of end there. It's kind of trapped behind this glass box. So I'm trying to take it out of that glass box and into like the contemporary, but then also think about, well, over time, for example, the Benin Bronzes have been outside of their home for over 200 years. What happens over time when that specific object has changed? It's now no longer the same as what it was before. Can we now take a digital version of that and create something new to separate it from, the story that it's now become, which is more this story of, a story of capture, a story of defeat, a story of colonialism. How do we detach it from that story, and now we create a new story, which is this in the digital world? Essentially, we have this new artifact, a new piece. So a lot of my work is about taking things from the past and bringing them to the contemporary and thinking about the future, and just like merging in that gap. So most of my pieces have that like that red thread there in them.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And I think yeah, I think my art, of course, is not anywhere related to that. But, I think both of our practices are kind of have this embedded personal identity that goes along with everything. I think my parents are immigrants, and I think they've tried their best to live the immigrant dream in America. And I think, um, people have a lot to say about this country and the things that it's done and things like that. But I think uh, putting that aside for a second, I think there still is a lot of opportunity that I was given, and I feel like part of me feels there is a responsibility to at least share that I'm thankful for those opportunities, and I think uh, creating the art that I do is one of those ways that I show that.
Yeah, I think in more like, well, for any like young artist, I think it's basically it's like your inspiration is essentially it's your story, right? It's like you
Right.
string from what you have, and then you try and use the mediums that we're like equipped with to now start telling that story essentially.
Yeah, this is all fascinating, and I would love to show the viewers some of your works. So maybe if Chidi, if you would like to start with sharing your screen, if you want to show some of the artworks there, and then we can go
Okay.
into Grant's work. I'm wondering how many heists like that have you done?
Um, there's been two successful heists, and my latest work actually is around non-material, like what happens with like when a language is stolen, what happens when a certain practice, or a spiritual practice is taken. But I can show you the this is the video of the
Just a
heist.
second, add into stage. Yeah, great.
I don't know if you can
Can you
hear.
see it now? Yeah. Oh, wow.
So the heist also had is like very significant with like the mask as well. That mask is part of this bag. In Nigeria, we call it the Ghana must go bag, and it's usually a bag that we would use to travel back home. And in Nigeria as well, it's used to like travel with big items and travel across country with it. But it's quite like an iconic bag that's been used. But the signifier for us is that we're entering into this space and going back home with these digital artifacts.
Interesting. Yeah, so it's a mix of performance art, digital art, and traditional medium, I guess, as well. That's super interesting. One of the questions that we had is actually how technology influences your art and how you're using technology in your art. You mentioned your scanners, Chidi. And then, yeah, Grant would love to see your art as well. Maybe you can talk about technology in your art
Yeah,
as well.
I don't know. I don't know if Chidi wanted to chime in first because I'm trying to find like a good PDF of my art. Unfortunately, I was trying to
Okay.
upload some images and it wouldn't work right now. So I don't know if
No
Yeah,
worries.
yeah.
I can also well, talking about technology, I can talk about
Yeah.
another um, piece, which is essentially I was using uh, TouchDesigner, if anybody's ever used TouchDesigner, but it was taken from TouchDesigner and merging like both the physical and the digital at the same time. So I created these sculptures that were made. Don't know if I can share my screen again.
Sure.
These sculptures, yes, these sculptures were essentially made from like bronze, and you've got the physical artwork or the physical sculpture, and I
Mhm.
was really like trying to have this opposition to the museum. So you know how whenever you go to a museum, everyone's like, "Don't touch." You see it, you see something it's like,
Yes.
"Do not touch," but actually when you think about it, most of the artifacts that they're displaying were either some of them were like musical instruments. Like whenever I see something that's essentially a musical instrument, I want to know how it sounds. You want to touch it, but it's kind of like the polar opposite of what we're doing. So in this installation, I made a sign. I said, "People, please touch." And then when you touch the each of the sculptures, and then you also like touch hands, that creates and basically ends the circuit and creates a new digital sculpture on the screen. So you have the digital that's created. So this is an example. Yeah. So it's using the conductivity to um, essentially create a new sculpture, the digital, which is almost like the future of what um, these sculptures could be. And like in a few ways, I was looking at this from the perspective of yes, I've taken all of the like kind of archival data that's and then use that archival data to now create these new digital sculptures and physical sculptures. But then the future of that is the digital, which will essentially like live on. And then another thing was the actual practice of people coming together to create which was highly inspired by a practice in southeastern Nigeria called Mbari. And Mbari is a practice where a whole community would come together and they would create art. But the art was put in this Mbari house, but it was only for the sake of a donation to the god of the land. It wasn't supposed to be given for people just to look at, similar to like a gallery or museum of today. So I also wanted to have that juxtaposition and of that. Another thing is that the practice of Umbari is also something that's been destroyed. So how do I bring that practice back of people coming together to create in the digital realm? So it's like really looking at all those different things of like the past, the present, and now looking of like the future of this, and making something a bit as like a almost like a FU to the museum. Like, yes, you can touch, you can touch this.
Please do touch. Yeah,
Yeah,
I love
please
it.
touch. It's meant to be
Yeah.
touched.
Yeah, I love it. And I love the participatory element in your work. Looks very interesting. Grant, were you able to find
Let
your...
me
Yeah.
try. Let me try.
I
Okay.
see that. Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, I think at least for me, I was talking about kind of exploring kind of more like more concrete themes like sharing like themes of realism and things like that. And so a lot of I work typically in different series because those series are kind of aligned with the places I've lived. And I think that being able to share with the viewer my interpretations of my past experiences are probably one of the most honest and genuine ways I can create this type of art because I know what it's like to have lived in these places and all the little nuances that goes along with that. And so, you know, when I first created my art, it just was really focused on creating things that are relatable. But I think more so in recent years, I've been trying to understand how I feel like my practice has shifted just a little bit to try and approach this art like the study of people more so in like a sociologic and anthropologic way where really trying to tackle down why it is we are shaping our world, how we're shaping our world, and kind of the sacrifices we make along the way, whether that's voluntary or involuntary. So I think these 6 images here at least are just from the top of my website if you go to the California series, but I think that they share kind of some of those ideas. So like for example, on the left, on the top left, and also on the bottom there, you see kind of more agricultural based things. And so the real question is, you know, in studying in creating these types of art, I wanted to also kind of highlight how we are moving as people and what lives we sacrifice. In this case, I think it's pretty obvious. I'm kind of depicting cows as a way to show what is the sacrifice these cows make so that we have food on the table, but also how are we shaping our landscape and what are the ramifications of those things. And so I think not only is it kind of familiar to people who have lived in these areas, and also familiar to a lot of people around the world because there's lots of places with agriculture and lots of places where we have highways and things of that nature, but also just kind of if you take a look at my art a little bit deeper, just to really kind of share with people what it means to live in the places that you do, and also kind of understanding kind of what all the labor, all the time, and all the money, and all the lives that have gone into kind of the life that you live. And so I think on top of that, I think like I was saying, I create art that from places that I've lived. And so I think that there's small things that I try to illustrate, and smaller details that I try to incorporate. And I really want people to be thrown into this world, which is why I try to work in series, because I think it takes multiple illustrations to really create a cohesive and comprehensive message. And so, for example, this is like if you scroll a little bit lower on my website, you'll come across some of these images. And so really kind of what it's like to really drive through California, which is, where I grew up for the majority of my childhood. And so, kind of the vegetation that grows there, what California is identified for, which is a lot of it had been prior to, the tech industry and things like that was agriculture and still is agriculture for the most part, as it's the backbone of California, and, what it means to live there. And so I think, yeah, I think those are kind of the themes that I try to tackle with a lot of my art. And yeah, yeah. Let me try to
No,
get these off the stage here.
that's great. No, I actually have a follow-up question to your art. It's so visually stunning. I actually wanted to speak to you about the mediums. So your art, it looks, you could mix it up for a traditional artwork. So if you could share a little bit about your practice, how you combine your traditional art practice with digital, and where one switches to another.
Yeah, so I'm glad that we're having this conversation because first I wanted to say, I initially wanted to be a painter, but I didn't have space in my apartment when I was younger, and I also didn't have the money to pay for canvases and paints. And so I looked towards digital mediums because they were much cheaper and you can make mistakes early on, and I had those resources, whereas it was harder to find resources to paint. And so that's really how I started my practice. And so I always envision my art when I create my pieces digitally, I always think about what they would look like in physical form. And so I think through the years, as I've been thinking about that more and more and have brought a lot of my works to print form, um, I think it's kind of always kind of been a foundation for me in terms of when I'm illustrating to think about, how is this digital work going to look like a painting and how can it translate to kind of traditional audiences, um, in that fashion. Um, yeah, I don't know if you had another question.
Yeah, just maybe a little bit more on the practical side, how you create your works.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of my work is photography based, and then on top of that is a lot of freehand. And so um, I don't really think I think of myself like the opposite of a perfectionist, and so a lot of the times I'll take like photo I take like thousands of photographs, every month, every week essentially, and I use a lot of those as references, and then I'll fill in the rest with how I feel. So a lot of the times my illustrations I don't really know what it looks like at the end, like before I start. A lot of times there's not very much of a drafting that goes on, and I have some of these illustrations here that the Museum of Art and Light had printed as postcards. And so, for example, when I have this here, um, they're all shapes, so they're all like just polygons on Adobe Illustrator. So I will just, what I did for this one is I just layered multiple layers back to back to back until it looked good, and then in terms of the colors, I don't really have a specific set of colors that I use. I just know what things should look like and should not look like, um, and so it's a lot of quote unquote using references from photographs, and then a lot of quote unquote just freehand where I'm just kind of creating things until I think it looks good. And I feel like that's one of the most honest ways to create art because the composition is complete when I think it's complete.
Makes sense. No, it looks beautiful. I have a question to Chidi. For someone who is not familiar with looty.art, and I know you spoke a little bit about it, shared some of the things that you do, maybe you could share a little bit more about your future plans, where you're trying to go with it, and just in a few words, what's been going on lately.
Yeah, well, it's really like a multidisciplinary practice, and like the main goal of that is to think about if we had like a completely new slate, and we had this new slate or the clean sheet of paper, and we could use that to how will we memorialize our culture and history in a sense of the way that a museum is doing that today. What would we do in this day and age? Let's say we had no memory of like the legacy of anything from the past, or the way that things are done, the way that things are displayed in the past. How would it be done? So essentially, like my goal is to create a, well, I hate to use the word museum, but sort of like a museum in a way, or a new way of us memorializing culture and history. And for me, that way is through continuing the culture, through engaging in the culture, and actually practicing it in new ways. So like the Mbari Memorial project that I've done in the past, and also with the Benin Bronzes, we're taking things from the past and keeping that like legacy going into the digital age. So imagine a museum in a sense where, where we could have all of these like stolen artifacts in a way, but re-represented in a new form.
I think it's a beautiful idea. I really, really like it. And, art restitution is a very interesting topic in itself. And there have been so many layers of stolen art. And I feel like, sometimes this conversation gets lost and some topics get more attention than the others. But I think it's a very interesting practice where you take something that's been taken away and kind of given it new, fresh life with the new medium. So I'm very interested in this project.
Well, I really wanted to do that just so that it could remove it away from this conversation, which is really, to be honest, it can be quite heavy. It's quite emotionally charged as well. And I'm trying to remove it away from that conversation into a new conversation, which is, hey, look at what we can do when we use this as a springboard to something new and something intentional to continue on the culture, because essentially it doesn't die in a museum. It doesn't die being locked away in an archive where no one can interact with it or no one can see it. We can continue on that into this new digital age. And how basically is this question of how are we going to do that? I've got my to it, but I also want this to inspire other people to think about like their how would you, within your own, like even within your own family history or within your own like country's history, how would you do that? How would you continue on so that the next generation will be looking back at, this is what we created and this is what we made.
Yeah. And is it possible to see some of both of your works in person? We're speaking about museums a lot, but basically, is there any physical place where we can see it?
So if anybody is going to be in London in October, I'm actually going to be doing my first exhibition, like solo exhibition. It's going to be during the Frieze Art Week. It's going to be at the Art Hotel in Shoreditch in London. So if anybody is there in London during that time, please, please follow, like keep following looty.art, or follow my personal page. Will be like putting up more information about that.
Thank you. No, that sounds great. Congrats on the solo show.
I think
How
that's
about you,
a
bro?
I was just gonna say, I think that's a pretty powerful thing that you're doing, Chidi, because of course, I have no connection or relation to the art that you're talking about, but I think that it's really powerful to say, you know, these conversations about stolen artifacts are important, but sometimes maybe the conversation stops there, whereas it's important to talk about the evolution of this type of culture and art beyond those things that people constantly are talking about, and maybe those things overshadow future conversations about how this type of art can evolve and things like that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
But
It's a highly like bureaucratic, and a lot of those conversations, if you're actually looking, they're done at a very governmental level. So you like once you get to that stage of like returning an artifact, it's actually not going to be. It's like a country like Egypt would have to call for Britain to bring back the artifacts. It's no longer on like an individual level, which kind of removes us as kind of like layman's people from that conversation, and it's no longer ours now. It's more like at such a high level that we don't really interact with it, and when they come back, it kind of makes no difference to people's day-to-day lives anyway. So it's like, yeah, let's try and
Yeah.
see what we can do to have that impact.
Yeah. And then, yeah, I guess for my art currently, I believe the only place that it's currently where you can see some of it is at the Museum of Art and Light, where I think they have a current show for their permanent collection. And so that's the only place I think that is currently on view. But I guess I'll post about it if I can recall some other places. But yeah, yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, it's been really interesting to be talking to both of you and learning about your practices. One other question that just came to my mind from both of you chiming in is how likely are you to collaborate with the other artists for your projects, both of you? And have you been having successful collaborations? Are you looking for more collaborators? Because it sounds like, in a way, both of you could.
Yeah, I guess I've never thought about it. Well, it's my first time meeting Chidi, so um, I guess to be completely honest, I don't really see. I think like in the way our practices currently are, I think it would be hard, but I think taking those at least from my end, taking those ideas of um, using LiDAR techniques to try and digitally capture stolen artifacts, I think could have a lot of important relevance in America as well. And so I think trying to find a way to kind of weave those narratives together. But yeah, that's a good question. I haven't really thought of that. I mean, in terms of other collaborations I've done with other artists, I haven't done too many, but I think that's also mostly because I feel like I'm still very early in my career, and I still haven't really found truly found my quintessential way I want to practice. And so I think before I impose my art onto other artists, I think it's important that I learn about myself first. And so that's the only reason I think I haven't really done too many collaborations with other artists before.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and I think collaborations can also come in other ways. It can just be like, you know, I've had like conversations with other like artists or creators I've had, where we've done talks together and shared like ideas. Like I think sometimes the outcome doesn't necessarily have to be like actual like we collaborate and then we have an exhibition and then those things. I think there's so many ways to actually collaborate and where people like idea sharing and things like that can like go really well. I had one like very successful collaboration with a group called Milele Museum, who are from Rwanda, and Milele they actually have created a computer game. So it was like a really good collaboration where we took the digital scans that I had lifted from the British Museum and then put those into their game. So we can actually go into the Milele game and we're showing the artifacts in their original form, the way they would have looked like if they were never stolen or if they were never taken. So I think that was like a really good collaboration because there was, firstly, it's similar digital mediums, but you know, uh, gaming and art are two very like different things, and then but coming together for like a similar cause is like great. I think it's great when two different like mediums come together to have one as like that fusion. It's like always great.
Absolutely. No, we should check out that game. Great.
Yes.
Well, Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today for this conversation, for our Art Voices conversation. Really looking forward to seeing more of your projects and your art. I think the topics that you cover are super relevant and visually beautiful. So I'm really looking forward to seeing more of that. And I would like to thank everyone for joining our conversation today. I see there are quite a bit of viewers, and that's great. Farrah and I are trying to make these conversations engaging and useful for you guys. If you have any questions, please drop us a line, contact us on social media, follow everyone, and we will see you next week. We have some more exciting guests that are going to be coming in. And Grant and Chidi, thank you so much for your time. And it's really great to see you, hopefully see you in person sometime.
Thank you.
Then yeah, thank you. Thank you, Grant, Elena, Farah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Farrah. See you soon. All right.